Good evening. Back in early November last year, as the world was preparing for COP29 here in Baku, a story published by the BBC gained worldwide attention. Well, the story was based on secret recordings that the BBC said showed COP29 CEO and Deputy Energy Minister Elnur Sultanov appearing to have used his role to discuss potential fossil fuel deals. Well, they went on to reveal that video to other sources, who then commented to the BBC that Mr. Sultanov's actions were completely unacceptable and a betrayal of the COP process. But the video in question turned out to be not what it first appeared. Now, Mr. Sultanov has published an extensive document containing all of his requests to the BBC for the full video to be released. A News will be publishing those details on our platforms this evening, so viewers can make their own judgments. I should also point out that we have reached out to the BBC asking for a full and detailed explanation, and in the last few minutes we've received an official response from the BBC in the form of the following statement. A BBC spokesperson told A News that the BBC stands by its journalism. Well, earlier I went to meet Elnur Sultanov himself to get more detail on his side of this story. Deputy Minister, thank you for inviting us into your office here to meet with us and talk about this very difficult issue that's arisen. I want to start by putting to you what the BBC said back in November. Let's just have a look at some of these articles that were written. We've got the first one here, still online obviously. COP29 chief secretly filmed promoting fossil fuel deals. A similar article here on Instagram, another one in Azerbaijani, different languages. So the BBC clearly made a big attempt to promote this story as far and as wide as they could. And it was based on a series of allegations that essentially boiled down to the idea that you were using your position, using COP29 as an event, to actually promote actively things that went against the spirit of that event. Let's talk now about what happened from your side and the experience of your interactions with the BBC.
Guy, thank you so much for bringing up this issue. So what really happened to me, even today, whatever BBC and its associates have published and aired? To me, a meeting happened, one of more than 1,000 meetings I have had. And in this meeting, a person who claimed that he is representing an Asian company wanted to meet us, and I really don't say no to anybody. I haven't said no to anybody who wanted to meet me so far. Because they want to participate at COP, and we agreed to a meeting and invite my two colleagues, also a colleague from high-level champion's office, because this is a private organization. But when the conversation starts until it ends, which lasted for about 25 minutes, this person only expresses basically his company's desire to invest in oil and gas business in Azerbaijan. And what I do, mainly I remember my colleagues also responding, but probably for 95% of time I was the one talking. And what I do, I kindly inform this person how COP29 is not about oil and gas, and how if fossil fuels are to be discussed, if at all, they should be discussed within the decisions taken by COPs, including transitioning away from fossil fuels. So this is the conversation. And it's one of the, as I said, more than 1,000 conversations that happened before. Have there been similar conversations? Probably. So this is it. And then, of course, it became clear that this person is actually an agent for Global Witness, and BBC picked this up mainly. And the way they report it, as you read, I read it once really, because you don't want to go through garbage can twice. So I have not looked at piece, what they aired second time. But basically they reported what you said, that COP CEO was secretly recording, discussing oil and gas deal. So very briefly, to me, secretly recording a public figure is already news, right? It catches attention, right? It's a very cheap tactic to be used. But to me, if somebody should be ashamed of secretly filmed part, it's those who have done it. I don't have a particular problem with that, but again, it's up to them. They did it, and let them carry the responsibility, moral, professional, and legal, for that. I don't mind that per se.
So your biggest issue is not with the fact you were secretly recorded, or even with the fact that the person was pretending to be someone else. It's about what happened next.
Guy, you wake me up at 3 a.m. in the morning and ask me questions that this person asked anything about climate. My answers to those questions will be the same, similar in essence. Why? Because my ideas about climate issue and climate crisis we are facing is informed by best available science. It's informed by my official responsibilities. They don't change depending on whether I'm in private environment or public environment. They don't depend on, I don't ask people whether they are filming me or not, or thinking about that when I talk about climate issues. My answers are the same. And in fact, although we are deviating a little bit, one of the issues when I went public criticizing BBC and the Global Witness for their irresponsible behavior, my point was that you could have done the same thing and obtained the same information from me without all this faking, manipulating, and hidden cameras. If just somebody approached me, said that, hey, I'm from Global Witness or BBC, asked for a permission to record and asked the same questions, he would have gotten the same answers. You don't need to go to all those lengths and faking and trespassing moral lines to do this. I would have said the same. I carry responsibility. Again, whether private, public, it doesn't matter. Whether filmed or not, it's my responsibility to behave. And what makes easier it for me to behave is that, again, scientific language is almost the same. And in fact, again, another deviation, maybe a footnote, in climate discussions, in climate crisis, whenever you have divergence of ideas, political divergence, science always comes in to soothe everybody because scientific consensus is very clear. So I'm also informed by that. So my point is, again, secretly filmed, fine, they did it, and if they feel that they should be ashamed of that, let them have every feeling they have. I don't mind anybody doing anything like that.
I suppose just in the defence of the BBC, they might argue that they're not the only broadcaster that has carried out this practice. It's happened across different...
Again, that's not this is not the gist of my criticism of what they have. But now let's move to the second stage, right? If somebody asks me about oil and gas and nothing else, and every answer I have to that person is oil and gas is not what COPs are about, and you depict this encounter as a sultan of discussing oil and gas business, that is now above and beyond any or the basic standards of journalism, right? So you tell him no and no, because this person was very, apparently, later on I think that he was very carefully chosen. So he's very nice, broken English. Again, he arouses these feelings of sympathy, very nice, ignorant, he doesn't know what COPs are about. And what do? We'll say, okay. I mean, I really turned this conversation into a very polite educational session for this person. This is what happens. And if you depict this as discussion of oil and gas, this is really something unacceptable. And anybody who watches that conversation, they wouldn't deduce these things that the BBC deduced. And of course, this gives me the idea that they already had their pre-written script before they staged all this conversation. So the conversation is not something that gave rise to BBC's ideas. They already had a script. According to that script, They organized something so that they could fish for evidence. They failed, they couldn't get any evidence, but still they went ahead anyways and reported what they wrote beforehand. And out of 25 minutes long conversation, they could find only 2%, about half a minute long part that they published. Again, I think what they did, distorting the evidence, was wrong. But my point is that, and in my public post, I very clearly expressed my feelings, which I already shared with BBC and Global Witness on 27th of November, my extensive, basically, email. They really did not, in a sense, they swallowed that. They did not report back and email back saying that, no, this is not what happened. They simply said that we are not going to share that video conversation. So eventually the point is, I have my claims about them, they have their claims about me. The adjudicator between us is excellence evidence. And the evidence is this 25 minutes long conversation I had with their agent. And I'm saying that we have heard you talking and making claims, we haven't seen you publishing the evidence. Publish the evidence. Sharing 2% out of 100% and holding back 98% does not count as evidence. If you can talk the talk, now walk the walk and share the evidence for everybody to see, because I am saying that whatever I say about you and whatever I publicly posted is right, and whatever you say is wrong. Apparently they have a different idea. The only thing that could resolve this difference is the evidence.
And we've got this full text of the email right in front of us, and thank you very much for giving us access to this. I mean, it's very, very detailed, but in summary, your position, your response to the BBC, where you've requested that they show not just you, but everybody in the whole world what is on this 98% of the video that hasn't been shown. Their response to your request isn't to say that it's been lost or it's been tampered with or it's been in some way removed. It's to say that their choice is not to show it. Is that correct?
So Guy, they started this. This is tandem. So I refer to them as a group because they say that it was done, this gathering of information by Global Witness. But from the very start, they have been cooking this information and claims together, emailing us together. They started in late October, I believe. So they published and aired this on the 8th of November. Starting from the 13th of November, I very politely, because this is the time that the global discussions are going on, and you don't want to distract anybody from the main issue, because COP29 was about delivering in terms of the challenges of the climate crisis. And I didn't have time to develop on somebody's speculation, whoever they are. But starting from 13th of November on, I asked them very politely, I said that I saw your claims, but I haven't seen your evidence. And the evidence is this 25 minutes long. It makes about 1,500 seconds, by the way. You shared about 40 seconds of that. Could you please share all of it with everybody? I don't want to see it, just everybody, automatically. Global Witness said flat out no. BBC's Justin Rowlett said that the copyright of the video recording belongs to Global Witness, so we couldn't share it. And then I sent a letter to BBC at the highest level, at the chairperson's level, with the same very polite request that I have seen your claims, but I haven't seen your evidence. Could you please publish it? They also got back to me, I think it was early. So this is when I wrote my extensive email on 27th of November. So they got back to me with the same argument, that this is the copyright of Global Witness, we cannot share it. I'm not a lawyer, but I somehow felt that this is really amusing to say for the BBC that an asset stolen by fraudulent means by Global Witness now becomes the property of the thief. To me, it's a very weird way of expressing their feelings.
So just to clarify, the position that they came back to you with was that they could not share it because of fear of breaking copyright law. And did you get a sense that it was that they couldn't share it, or that they didn't want to share it? Was that obvious in the communication?
Guy, they won't share it because their conversation belies whatever claim they have about me. I think it's a blunder on the part of the BBC. And I hope it's an individual mistake, because that conversation has nothing to do with the claims. That conversation is about how I educate this very nice and ignorant person what the COP29 and COPs are about, how they are not about oil and gas, and how, if discussed at all, they should be discussed. In fact, this is my first sentence. It happened in the 13th of September. I cannot remember all of it, and unlike BBC and Global Witness, we don't record conversations without the consent of the individual, so I don't have the recording. They have it. But I remember somehow my first sentence, because I was so taken aback that this person, he introduces himself, and then his first sentence after the introduction is, we're going to invest in oil and gas business in Azerbaijan. So I was so taken aback that apparently this is the reason why I remember my first sentence. My first sentence is, sir, COP29 is not about oil and gas, it's about the tackling of the climate crisis we are facing. This is my first sentence. And the overall conversation from my side, so the guy, this person, keeps talking about SOCAR, oil and business, and we keep talking about decarbonization of SOCAR, how, again, we need to be moving forward with all those oil and gas decarbonization charter at COP28. So this is really, if one day, again, I really hope that some honorable individuals will wrest this video from the grip of BBC and Global Witness for everybody to see what this video is about. And it totally destroys their argument. And this is the reason why they are not sharing it. Yes, so this weird argument that copyright of Global Witness, then okay, I told them that this is really strange, but still, they shared a portion of it, right? Apparently a portion does not violate their understanding of the copyright. I said, fine. What about sharing substantial part of it? Because my first request was share original conversation fully. Copyright, fine, share 95% of it. And again, I am communicating at the highest level of BBC, and also Global Witness is always part of the, among those whom I sent these letters. I said, then share 95%, 80%, 70%. I don't know, first 5 minutes of it. Get it leaked. Apparently, they are very knowledgeable about cyber hacking and cyber skills, right? Getting this conversation leaked would have taken their 3 minutes maybe or so. They haven't done it, and they are not going to do it. And I'm challenging them. I'm saying that you say this is what you base your claims on, but you hold it back intentionally, and despite my repeated requests and demands that you share at least a substantial portion of that, to me that already indicates that every claim they have about me is already invalid. And the fact that they refuse to share it also indicates that whatever claim I have in my extensive response to them, which I shared with them, is valid as well. So if they don't like this, again, they have the video. I don't. I would have shared it if I had it. They have it. Let them share for everybody to see who is right.
I mean, just for the sake of balance, I do think it is worth just scrutinising this argument a little bit about the 2%. I mean, I do know, I'm not a lawyer, but I do have some experience of interacting with lawyers when it comes to public rights to show footage. And I know that in some situations, if you only show a certain small percentage of some footage, it can protect you against copyright infringement. But that would have to mean that the 2% selected in this case, by pure coincidence, was the 2% which misrepresented your point of view. That, I guess, would be seen by you as being fairly unlikely. I mean, I don't know the legal aspect of this, but Guy, these institutions which went to such great lengths, right,
faking, staging, creating, establishing fake accounts and websites, recording illegally without the consent of the two other participants, so there were three of us. There must be a way to find a way to publish this. I mean, I'm not saying that BBC publish it and write down your name under it. There must be millions of ways to find a way. Global Witness apparently can go to any length, right? Get it leaked, do something. I'm not asking for them to sign off on this saying that we shared this so that there could be some claims by Global Witness as a thief who stole this information, however weird that is. So they could have found a way of doing that. We could have cooperated. They could have shared it individually with somebody. Global Witness, again, I don't think they have any problem. And by the way, Global Witness, after the first time, on 14th or so November, I asked them to share. They flatly refused, and they never responded back again, despite all these repeated communications, because Global Witness was always there for me. But second issue, regarding what they chose, this 40 seconds. In portions of that, I talk about the green projects in SOCAR, right? But also, Guy, I mean, it depends on the context. I'm also Deputy Minister of Energy, right? In what exact context that was said that SOCAR is doing gas, and by the way, natural gas is the cleanest of fossil fuels, and COP decisions refer to natural gas as a transitional fuel. And this is what we have discussed. And I believe that with them also, I told them how if natural gas Azerbaijan produces, and it does, goes and replaces coal in countries like Turkey, European countries, which it does, by the way, that is a temporary decarbonization. As long as you take care of the methane leakages, emissions, which is almost 30%, 30 times more potent than carbon dioxide, and you create lock-in effect, natural gas is really decarbonizer, right? Properly handled. And this is one of the reasons why European Union is trying to continue with this. And without natural gas, you cannot really incorporate all this renewable energy given their intermittency. And again, when they publish one day, if they find courage and decency to publish the information, all of these things is what I am communicating to this guy, right? Educating him that in case you want to talk about fossil fuels, natural gas maybe, and only within this context, which is in line with IPCC reports, which is in line with COP decisions, right? This is it, I think. So
it's very interesting.
So that 40%. Also, the last thing. Sorry. This is what I was thinking about to saying you. 2% almost always is a margin of error, right? Out of speech, everybody's speech, when somebody talks for about 25 minutes, you can find about 2% of that and take it out of context, and it might be interpreted to mean anything you want to. And therefore, in science, also in journalism, which is based on probabilistic calculations, we have a term called margin of error. 2%, as I said, almost always is just that.
I was going to say that there was clearly something going on, a debate taking place behind the scenes, and sometimes not behind the scenes, during COP29. And I remember I was there reporting. It wasn't just politicians, it was journalists who were disagreeing too, about this notion of a purist approach to energy transition. So some people were taking the view that any sense of a managed transition over an extended period of time away from fossil fuels was somehow sullying the project, the spirit of COP29, that people should be excluded unless they wanted a very dramatic end to fossil fuel economies. And I wonder whether you feel that in some way has informed this discussion, this debate.
Guy, I appreciate this question you asked so much. Why? Because there is a very fine line between apologists for fossil fuel, and they are very creative, could be right, wrong, but their strategic aim is really defending fossil fuels, right? And they come up with very calculated, very scientific arguments, and okay, I think they deserve to be listened to. I'm not one of them. And my speech, and I don't want my position, including in that conversation we had, to be framed as somebody who is trying to I don't defend fossil fuels. There is no way we are going to be reaching net zero by 2050 with fossil fuels being consumed and produced the way we are doing today. My answer to that person, and really my conviction about the climate crisis and solutions to that, is that, again, it is informed by best available science. And the best available science, and as you know, the best chance we have to tackle the current crisis and to make sure that we stay at 1.5 to 2100 is to get to net zero by 2050, right? But in that model, scientific models of net zero by 2050, this is the North Star. This is really the holy grail which we believe we could reach, but probably we are going to overshoot, right? Even in that best and most radical model, oil, gas, and even coal is being consumed in the world. Yes, you have to capture all the carbon dioxide. There shouldn't be any methane emissions and all that. You should offset if you cannot capture all that. But there is no scientific models that calculates that we could do without them by 2050. So this is really my point. I'm not defending anything, anybody. I don't have any agenda. I am, in the last 1 year, I'm from Ministry of Energy, but at the same time, I really studied this issue religiously. And when you understand that the entire world is looking up to you to save us from this crisis of humanity, which is the biggest crisis to me in the modern civilization's history, then I don't think you have any moral right to be in defense of anything. And I was telling always to my team members that if we want to serve Azerbaijani national interests, that goes through serving the interests of the globe. If we do that, we will end up serving the national interests of Azerbaijan more than anything. So in that sense, my conversation with this person has nothing to do defending anything. It was about telling this very naive, again, very polite, and hopefully, again, I really wish that, again, BBC and Global Witness has courage and decency to share it. You will see how ignorant and nice this person is, although he's relentlessly asking about oil and gas. And what do? You teach him one person at a time, right? You're telling him, okay, he might have good intentions, but he's totally wrong about what COPs are about. And you teach him that, okay, no oil gas, but in case you insist, well, there are COP decisions, there are IPCC reports within which you can discuss fossil fuels, which is basically about how they could be used to decarbonize our economies till net zero. So this is the overall framework of our talk.
Well, look, we will publish this email in detail, unedited, across all of our platforms. And we will also reach out to the BBC so that they're able to give comments and publish their response too. Thank you very much for providing it to us and for that detailed explanation. And are you hopeful, Deputy Minister, that this will be resolved in a positive way?
One thing, BBC, to me, again, they accepted all of my arguments. They never said anything to that extensive email that I have sent to them. And they should accept it because they don't have the evidence. Physically, they do have the evidence, but it doesn't support what they claim to be. They fabricated something. But at the same time, there was another line. They kept saying that we gave you a chance to respond, and you can still respond, and we will consider including parts of your response in the article we published. At the start and today, when the BBC shows what they are capable of in terms of distorting everything and still holding back the evidence, do you think I could have trusted them with my words for them to be considered to be included in the article which is still totally wrong and whose evidence is held back? I said, no, thank you. But I am ready to right of reply without your interference. And they denied that right to me also. Regarding your last question, am I hopeful? I think it's a matter of, it's not that BBC came and reported on some food stall in night market, right? These guys came and reported on a COP official 3 days before the most faithful discussions on the most important crisis that we are facing was about to start, right? Fine, but that comes with a lot of responsibility, right? And this is baseline responsibility. Share the evidence you say you base your claims upon. So to me, if there is minimum standards of decency and professionalism and morality out there remaining, they should publish it one way or another. We can work through all these weird copyright issues. There must be millions of ways of doing that, but unless and until they share the conversation, then whatever they said about me is invalid, and whatever I said in my email to them, and thank you for publishing it one more time, is correct.
Deputy Minister, thank you very much for joining us on Newshour.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so an awful lot of covered detail there. As again, I say, we will be publishing all those details that you saw there in the interview on our platforms, and we'll continue to reach out to the BBC to hopefully get more detail on their side of the story. Now, Ollie Barrett is in London for us and has been following this. Ollie, thanks ever so much for joining us as always. A lot of detail there to go through. Clearly there are two sides to this, but what can we read into this in terms of the focus? It seems to have changed. When the minister there was saying, the Deputy Minister was saying that he could accept the questionable practices, let's say, in terms of how the information, how the video was captured in the first place. But what he found much harder to accept is the continued refusal not to show everybody the lion's share, if you like, of the full conversation.
Yeah, interesting, that balance, and interesting the very short statement that the BBC has provided as well, just saying that it stands by its journalism, not clearly wanting at this stage anyway to get into much detail about how this specific piece of journalism came about and, as you've been saying, was reported widely around the world. So clearly there are a lot of questions remaining. Whether we get further detail from the BBC or any further responses very much remains to be seen. Now, the BBC has very strict, it would say, editorial guidelines around filming with people of secret identities or in a so-called sting type of setup, which normally would reside upon there being a very strong public interest, is how it would be described in the BBC's editorial guidelines, about going ahead with the publication of any information which was received or gathered in such a sting operation. So you would have expected that behind the scenes there would have been a lot of conversations involving senior editorial figures, but also legal figures, lawyers as well, to work out whether the publication of this information was worth pressing ahead with. Obviously at the time it was decided that it was, and that you would expect would have been made on a public interest rationale, but without much more detail in terms of a statement, in terms of a response from the BBC at this stage. I'm only speaking really with regards to what we know to be the BBC's editorial guidelines, rather than the BBC saying that in detail on the record.
And Ollie, you and I are both journalists. We know there's a whole range of different approaches taken throughout the world, and no organisation is perfect. But these practices are not hugely common, are they? The idea of pretending to be someone you're not, as you put it, the so-called sting operations, they're not widespread, as perhaps some people in the public might think.
They're not, and actually sting operations are quite often heavily criticised. I mean, here in the UK, one of the most famous sting journalism operators was a man who became known as the Fake Sheikh. That was his moniker, and he used to uncover a series of stories for the Sun newspaper, and when he was doing so, at times he was widely criticised for his methods. The Sun would normally justify those methods again on a public interest rationale, and did uncover a series of scandals over the years. Actually, in the end, the man behind the Fake Sheikh ended up being convicted with regard regards to one of his stings on a perversion of the course of justice charge. And so that, just one example, illustrates how difficult these can be. You will also hear from people who do these undercover stings, these investigative pieces in this way, that often they don't make it to air. They decide to go ahead with the filming or whatever it might be, and then once it's in-house, once they've looked at the pictures, they can't get it past the lawyers, they don't put it to air, and so quite a lot of the journalism of this type that takes place we never see because it's not considered to have a strong enough basis behind it or a strong enough public interest rationale. So it's deeply controversial, this type of journalism. That said, sting operations have led to uncovering important stories in different parts of the world, so they are not unknown. It's not an unprecedented form of journalism, but deeply controversial, deeply difficult to get on air, and always contains that grey area. Someone somewhere has to make the final decision about whether it is worth the invasion of an individual's privacy in this way, the duplicitousness, if you like it, of carrying out an interview in this way. Someone somewhere has decided that that is worth pressing ahead with publication because they will have decided they feel it's in the public interest. But there is always that grey area about whether indeed it is right or not to do so.
Ollie, how much, this is obviously just one incident, but how much of this is indicative of a BBC that's going through a change, that is obviously a hugely prestigious organisation that has been around for an enormously long period of time, has changed and adapted many times over the years? What state is the organisation in at the moment, and how, if it is changing, how is it changing?
The BBC is in a very difficult spot at the moment for a number of reasons. One of that is simply to do with a squeeze on resources and funding, and that in turn has meant a squeeze on resources and funding available for its journalism and its news operations. The number of journalists at the corporation has been falling. We've seen difficulties around funding for the World Service operations too. We've seen here in the UK, domestically, services being slashed in many parts of the country as it tries to operate at a lower cost base. Now, many of the people who work at the BBC or who used to work at the BBC will say that the corporation's journalism may well suffer as a result of that. One of the other elements of the challenge faced by the BBC at the moment is simply the political climate that we all find ourselves operating in here in the UK, but also around the world. The polarised nature of politics that means the BBC, like many other broadcasters and journalistic operations, can find itself criticised from left and from right at the same time. That has led some to feel that the BBC is sometimes actually over-cautious in what it goes ahead and publishes. We've seen that just in recent days with the controversy around Elon Musk and some of the comments he's been making online about so-called grooming gangs and the attacks he's been making, personal attacks on the UK's Prime Minister and also government ministers as well. Some here in the UK have criticised the BBC for being too slow in some of its reporting around Elon Musk. The critics say because the BBC at the moment is overcautious and doesn't want to get sued, doesn't want to necessarily go up against powerful figures for fear of coming under some kind of scrutiny itself and perhaps legal challenge itself. And so the BBC is squeezed in all sorts of directions for all sorts of different reasons. That said, many here in the UK, many at the BBC will say that it is a prized national institution, that it creates some of the world's best broadcasting and best journalism, despite some of those funding challenges. It is a source of argument here in the UK because there are some politicians on some sides of the debate who say the BBC's funding model should be scrapped entirely. There are others who say that if that were to be the case, then the UK would be potentially losing a great national institution and a source of soft global power around the world. So the BBC facing all sorts of challenges at the moment from all sorts of different directions, but it does remain either way an important British institution.
Very, very interesting to see how this eventually plays out. Ollie, in London there for us, thank you very, very much indeed. Well, that is all we have time for on this edition of Newshour. Please do stay with us on A News for plenty more news and analysis. And from all of us here on the team in Baku, we wish you a very pleasant evening ahead.